Well, hi there. I'm here today with a children's python, which is actually named after a person named George Children. It's not named because it looks like children or is super appropriate for children or is made out of children. None of that is true. But this is one of the coolest snakes in the world, in my opinion. This particular children's python comes to us from Utah's Reptile Adventures. They're a very cool nonprofit organization that's very shortly opening a zoo, a little reptile encounter zoo that you should definitely check out if you happen to be in the area. And we'll actually include a video down in the description that talks a little bit about that and their efforts to create that zoo. It sounds like it's going to be pretty neat. I love me some children's pythons. And they need some love because most people don't even know about them to love them. You know, I want to start with the fact that this is a python. It is really, honestly, I mean, I think of them as being a lot like carpet pythons, but really the snakes that this particular individual, at least, reminds me of the most are reticulated pythons. Their eyes are even a little bit similar. Retics have small eyes. These guys have large eyes. They've both got vertical pupils, but the retic eyes are very dramatic because they tend to be kind of a bright orange in color. These eyes are also very dramatic because they're large. Their coloration is more like that of an anaconda, which is a cool looking snake. And then, you know, being pythons, as do many pythons, they've got these labial heat pits, which that's something you're not going to find on any comparably sized colubrids. So cool. Also, being pythons, they've got legs. They've got two tiny, tiny little legs. I love these guys. I mean, they are every bit of the personality and behavior of big pythons, but just in the tiniest little python package. I am falling in love with children's pythons. Let me tell you why. The children's python is one of the smallest pythons in the entire world. Though this one's not quite fully grown, they don't get very much larger than this. Right around 3 feet, which sounds big. I mean, if I was talking about a lizard, 3 feet is big. When I'm talking about a snake, it's amazing once you stretch out a snake how quickly they get to 3 feet. I mean, we're talking a python that's roughly the size of a garter snake. They're also one of the most underrated snakes in the world. I mean, this is a python. It is every bit a python. They're an Australian python, like carpet pythons, which we've talked about before. And to me, they remind me a lot of the carpet python species, except they're a little bit friendlier. And, well, of course, they're tiny. But being a python, I mean, they still act like a python. They don't act like a colubrid snake. They act like pythons. And so this really is a giant snake in a tiny package. I mean, it sort of does for, say, reticulated pythons what the ackie monitor or some of the even smaller dwarf monitors do for Komodo dragons. I mean, you kind of get all of that personality in a tiny little package. And we give the children's python an overall score of 3.8 out of 5, which honestly seems a bit low. I mean, I don't think that score really reflects what an awesome pet this is, but to help you understand how it gets that score, we've broken it down into our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, we give the children's python a score of 4 out of 5. Really, the only considerable downsides are just that it is small and therefore fragile, you know, and you could also lose it. I mean, they're not a darty snake. They act like pythons when they move, so it's not going to get lost on you easily, but you could almost forget that you're handling it and lose track of it. More likely, though, is that it could get injured during handling, so I would definitely not say that this is a good snake for a small child to handle, because they could harm it, even kill it, very, very quickly just because they're little. They also can bite. I mean, the head is like the size of a marble, so if it bites you, it's not like it's going to do any real damage, but, you know, being bitten by a snake can be disconcerting, and, you know, this is a snake that can bite. It's not extremely likely to happen, but it can. You know, and being a python, they've got teeth that are a little bit bigger than some small colubrids, so you'll feel it, but it's not going to be a big deal. When it comes to care, we give the children's python a score of 4 out of 5. In a lot of ways, I mean, just think of this as being a tiny carpet python. And honestly, because carpet pythons are a lot more popular, it's easy to find information on them and take a lot of the things that you learn there and shrink it down real small like. It's going to be a similar enclosure to what you would have for a carpet python, just much littler. And these are a semi-arboreal snake like carpet pythons, so you're definitely going to want some floor space and some place to climb. They will get up in the trees a little bit. Which actually, going back to handling, the fact that this is a tree snake does make them very easy to handle because they'll hold on to you. You don't necessarily need to hold on to them. In fact, with a snake this small, I wouldn't recommend grabbing them or squeezing them in any way. They'll hold on to you. Just like most other snakes, they're going to need some sort of heating element, like a heat pad, heat tape, some sort of a heat emitter. But you're not going to need a big one because that enclosure is small. Just make sure you keep it on a thermostat so that you don't have any issues with burns or overheating. They're going to need a water bowl that will help with humidity and drinking. It's almost impossible to find a water bowl that will help with those things that this snake could not fit inside of and use to soak if it wants to. So, you know, the water bowl is going to be pretty easy to find for these. Something like Reptichips would make an excellent substrate. You're going to want something that'll maintain the humidity and is easy to clean up and deal with. And the nice thing is, on such a small enclosure, one block of Reptichips will last you like years. You're going to want a hot and a cool side hide for this snake. And being such a small snake, it's pretty easy to put multiple hides inside the enclosure. These guys poop infrequently, being snakes, and even if they poop on you, who cares? It's a tiny little poop. Well, you might care, but it's still, I mean, compared to getting pooped on by a retic, this is nothing. And another thing that is really just terrific about these guys is that they're easy to feed. They tend to be good feeders, and they tend to feed really well on rodents right from the beginning. Even though this is a very small snake, as hatchlings, they are large enough to handle small pinky mice. And that's one of the hard things with a lot of small snakes is getting the babies feeding. These guys shouldn't be much of a problem for you. Not to mention the fact that because you're buying it captive bred, you can be pretty well assured that any good breeder is going to get several meals in them before they even offer them for sale. So you're probably not even the one that has to deal with feeding the smallest of children's pythons. When it comes to hardiness, we give the children's python a score of 4 out of 5. These are actually a very solid, long-lived snake. I mean, for a little snake, these guys live a long time, in excess of 20 years. And the fact that they're all captive bred definitely increases the survivability. I mean, you know, if you buy a children's python, it's going to be captive bred and just solid. I mean, you know, there aren't very many snakes this small that live this long and that are going to come to you in as good of condition as a children's python is likely to come. Given proper care and barring accidents such as crushing it or cooking it or something like that, which these things can happen, a children's python should do really well for you. When it comes to availability, we give the children's python a score of 2 out of 5. And this is honestly where they lose the bulk of their points. They're excellent pets. They're just kind of hard to find. You can find them directly from breeders. There aren't that many breeders, but the people that are breeders of these snakes are doing it because they love them. And they're going to be really excited to share all their knowledge with you, to talk to you about children's pythons because they love them. These are a snake that is not expensive and not in high demand. They're hugely overlooked, at least in the United States. I think in Australia, they're much, much more appreciated, as they should be. But in the United States, they're hugely overlooked, and so the few breeders are going to be excited to hear from you. But they're kind of hard to find. Occasionally, you will see them for sale at expos. I have seen them in pet stores, but it is not common to see them in pet stores. I honestly, because you so rarely see children's pythons at all in the United States, I have never seen a single children's python morph for sale. I don't know how many of them we have because this is an Australian snake, and so if the morphs did not make it to the United States out of Australia when the snakes were banned, we don't have them. But I know in Australia, and this is actually thanks in large part to some cool videos that Dave Kaufman put out. We love Dave Kaufman's videos. He takes us around the world and shows us things that I can't afford to go see. And one of those would be he takes us to Australian reptile expos, and they have children's pythons all over the place. There are some glorious and amazing morphs, and I'm honestly, because I'm falling in love quickly with children's pythons, I'm gonna spend some time researching which of these morphs are available in the United States, because the biggest downside in some people's eyes to the children's pythons versus some of their close relatives like the spotted pythons is just that their colors are less dramatic. But when you see it like the albino children's pythons, that's a dramatic looking snake. It's glorious. And I like this anaconda look that the children's pythons have, but a little variation never hurt anyone. When it comes to upfront costs, we give the children's python a score of 5 out of 5. The great thing about being an overlooked snake is that even being captive bred, these guys are very affordable. You add on to that the fact that the snake is tiny and has fairly normal snake care. Everything about it is tiny. So the enclosure is, well, you don't need a tiny enclosure, pretty small for a python, and so it's cheap. It's very affordable. They're gonna need a bowl, like a water bowl, substrate that'll hold some moisture. I'd recommend something like Reptichip. They're gonna need a heat source, like a heat pad or heat tape, even a radiant heat panel. Keep any of those on a thermostat. I said before, cooking is one of the ways that you could lose your snake prematurely, and not having it on a thermostat is the best way to have an accident like that happen. Another way that you could lose it very easily is if you don't have a good lid on your enclosure, because these snakes can be escape artists, and so make sure you invest in a good lid. And then hides. Hides are not expensive when a snake is this small. So make sure you have one on the warm end, on the cool end. You could have hides all over that enclosure for as inexpensive as they'll be. And of course, we'll have links to all these things down in the description. Everything that you need for a children's python is reasonably sized because they're reasonably sized. Not that it's a factor in the score for upfront costs, but they're even inexpensive to feed because they're going to be eating various sizes of mice their whole lives. If you're buying those, say, in bulk as frozen feeders, you can buy a ton of that, like a year's supply for not a lot of money. They're just excellent. Very inexpensive to keep. And that is why the children's python gets an overall score of 3.8 out of 5. Honestly, children's pythons are just absolutely amazing pet snakes. They are great for beginners, but not just for beginners, because they are so underrated. Even really advanced keepers, many of them have never kept them. Some of them maybe have never even seen them, which is crazy. They're really just great pets for anybody who likes snakes. They're just astronomically underrated. So go get one. Go get one. Support one of these rad breeders, because they're one of the coolest people in the world. And just talk to them about children's pythons, because if snakes are right for you, it's a good chance this snake is right for you. As always, like and subscribe. Be sure to click the little bell, because we have so many awesome things that you've never heard of that we want to share with you, and you might never even know those videos exist if you don't click the little bell. Also, thank you to our patrons at Patreon. We cannot begin to thank you enough for all that you do for this channel, and we hope to see you real soon. They're a little bit wall-eyed looking.
Yeah, like being stick out.